I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Epstein case. I have intentionally avoided this case for years. Every time that I've heard Jeffrey Epstein's name on a podcast or in a news headline, I just scroll past it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to touch it. It felt like Hollywood tabloid gossip, and, it was kind of like celebrity gossip wearing a true crime mask. Who flew where, who knew who's on the list, all of those things. It had the texture of some kind of twisted entertainment, and I just didn't want to be a part of that machine. But right now, I think it's important to sit with that for a second, because if I thought that, others thought the same thing too. But that instinct is also a bit terrifying, because the impulse to look away should not happen just because the names are too famous and the story feels too big. This thinking is exactly what protected these people for 30 years. People in power are still people. Wealth doesn't grant immunity from accountability, or at least it shouldn't. But somewhere along the way, the spectacle of this case, the private islands, the presidential friendships, the flight logs with names that you'll recognize as leaders from corporations and countries, turned a human trafficking operation, a crime, into more of a pop culture curiosity. The moment this case started feeling like entertainment, the victims vanished from the conversation. But the victims are the whole point. We're talking about children, girls recruited out of poverty, passed between powerful men like commodities on a black market, as if they were exotic oranges that aren't allowed into the country, except for oranges aren't people, and these girls didn't get stopped by anyone. Because when you're friends with a president, when you have your own island, when your lawyers include the man who prosecuted a president and defended O.J. Simpson, the law isn't something that applies to you. The law is what you say it is. Maybe you didn't ignore it, but I did. I'm not looking away anymore. I'm actually paying attention, and I don't plan on missing things again. So let's start with what's happening right now, because the timing of this live stream isn't by accident. In 4 days, on March 26th, a woman named Tova Noel will sit before the House Oversight Committee and swear to tell the truth. If you don't recognize her name, here's why you should. She was one of the 2 correctional officers stationed 15 feet away from Jeffrey Epstein's prison cell the night that he died. We all know how he died. I'm not going to say that on YouTube, but we all know how he died. If you don't know, you can look it up. But this woman's job was to conduct mandatory security rounds every 30 minutes. She didn't conduct them. She was browsing the internet for furniture. Sometimes she was just sleeping. Over 75% of the required checks went unperformed. What does that say about our prison system? She has already admitted in a deferred prosecution agreement that she's falsified records that night. She signed documents claiming she'd done her job when she hadn't. She was indicted, she confessed, and then the system does what it always does. They look at your criminal history and they make a decision on how hard the crime should be for what you've done. She was given 100 hours of community work service. That was her punishment for not doing her job. Now, I don't know if that was too lenient or not. Part of me wants to say that it was too lenient. But the charges were dismissed. Now, however, Congress wants to talk about it, and they aren't calling her in to rehash old conversations that they've already had. Committee Chair James Comer said documents from the recent DOJ release led the committee to believe Noel has information that will assist in their investigation. That phrasing matters. Something in those files caught their attention. And there's like 1 million files. So when we do have access to these files, it's interesting because it's just all dumped and they're all numbered and nobody knows what anything is. You can't just go through there and say, oh, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. It's not indexed. They're in data sets, and there's thousands of files in each of them. But apparently, they have found something that hasn't been made public yet. Exactly. I mean, technically, I think it must be something that they found in the publicly made documents, but maybe other people haven't figured out what it is yet. But in a few days, we might actually learn what that something is. I want to know what it is. I think on April, April 14th, Attorney General Pam Bondi has been subpoenaed to testify before the House Oversight Committee. And it requires a vote to subpoena this person. And the vote wasn't even close to partisan. 5 Republicans broke rank to join Democrats in demanding her testimony. That doesn't happen unless people are angry. People are angry. Nancy Mace introduced the subpoena, put it simply, she introduced the subpoena, Nancy Mace. AG Bondi claims the DOJ has released all of the Epstein files. The record is clear that they have not. Seriously, I thought those millions of documents was everything, but apparently it's not. And if it's not, what is left to come out? So over the next several weeks, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, I think they say that's his name, Lutnick, will testify. He, however, proactively agreed to testify, which sounds like cooperation, until you hear that there are documents that proved he was actually communicating with Epstein years after he claimed he'd cut ties with him. He said that he hadn't spoke to him since 2005. But under oath, he admitted that he and his family had lunch with Epstein on his private island in 2012. Multiple lawmakers have called for his resignation. The committee has also requested testimony from Bill Gates, the former Apollo Global CEO, Leon Black, Goldman Sachs departing general counsel, Kathy Ruemmler, and also Epstein's former personal assistants, Leslie Groff and Sarah Kellen. And then there's Ghislaine Maxwell. She's sitting in a federal prison. She was moved to Texas, and she's apparently living the life there. She also invoked the Fifth on every question that the Congress had asked her, but recently her lawyer made a claim, a public offer. Grant her clemency, and she will talk. In fact, I've got a video that I can share on this, possibly, if I can. This is news from, I think,
Somebody who expected answers from...
Let me switch this. So I'm going to play a little bit of this. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but you can find it on YouTube fairly easily.
So anybody who expected answers from the co-conspirator of sex criminal Jeffrey Epstein today did not get them. Ghislaine Maxwell invoked her Fifth Amendment right, refusing to testify as she appeared virtually before a House Oversight Committee. Let's go live to CBS News Justice reporter Jake Rosen. So, Jake, what did lawmakers hope to get out of Maxwell? Really, how believable is she anyway, given her convictions? And is it true that what she really wanted was to get clemency?
Well, it's unsure how credible she could be in these conversations, but we do know that going back to last year, Reed, in conversations with the second in charge of the Justice Department, Todd Blanche, in that interview that they conducted separately from this House conversation, which was supposed to happen today, she was honest and transparent about certain issues and then refused to talk about others. What we do know is that she did not answer questions from both Republicans and Democrats on the committee today, and her attorney, David Marcus, read out loud this statement that we have at CBS.
This statement is what I was referring to, and I'll let him read it.
Essentially saying that in order for her to talk at all and provide any new details about whether it's President Trump or former President Clinton or others, that there would have to be some granting of a pardon or clemency to his client and Ghislaine Maxwell. I'll just read a part of this now. On his advice, Ghislaine Maxwell respectfully invokes her Fifth Amendment right to silence and decline to answer any questions today. And then it says later, if this committee and the American people truly want to hear the unfiltered truth about what happened, there is a straightforward path. Ms. Maxwell is prepared to speak fully and honestly if granted clemency by President Trump. What this would mean, Reed, if we kind of take a bigger step back, is if this congressional committee wants to hear further.
I guess the real question is, should she be granted clemency, even if she tells everything finally, and she's honest about everything finally? What do you guys think? Should there be any possibility of clemency? So, I guess now I want to describe something to you, and I want you to pay attention to how it makes you feel, because it's important. A 16-year-old girl is working a minimum wage job at a resort in Palm Beach, Florida. She feels lucky to have the job. She's folding towels. She's cleaning out locker rooms. Her father just got out of prison. Her family can barely keep the lights on. One afternoon, a woman approaches her. She's well dressed. She's got a British accent. She seems educated and connected. She tells the girl about a wealthy man who needs help with massages. $200 for 1 hour of work. The girl says yes. Now, if I stopped the story right there, what would you think? You'd probably think, WTF, that sounds like a scam. But to a 16-year-old without money, it sounds like a better job. That's not a crime. It's a lucky break. And that's exactly the point. That is how this style of human trafficking actually works. There is no windowless van with a group of men who snatch you up off the street, bind and gag you and blindfold you. There's no screaming or crying. There's no fighting or, trying to get away. You're excited for the opportunity that you have to be where you are in that moment. The only thing that's really here, however, is grooming. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. These victims were manipulated so well that even years later, when somebody tries to explain what happened to them, that they were traded. And that they were afraid and unable to leave. When the words come out of their own mouth, they almost always have this guilt that comes over them because of the idea that maybe they had a choice the whole time. Maybe it really was just a job. Some of them still believe to this day that they had a choice, but they never really had a choice. The girl that I'm talking about is Virginia Roberts. She was remarried, and I cannot pronounce her married last name. I will definitely try. Let's see. I don't know how to say it. Giuffre. Let me see if I could just put it in the chat for you guys to. I'm really bad with names, unfortunately, but so the girl's name was Virginia Roberts. The woman's name was Ghislaine Maxwell, and the man was Jeffrey Epstein. And Virginia wasn't allowed to leave. Giuffre. Really? Is that really with the G there? It's still Giuffre? Okay. Yeah, that actually sounds right. So for 2 years, she was a prisoner. When she finally did, she ran away with a stranger that she'd only known for 10 days. She was on the other side of the world. this was her only way out. She spent the next 16 years fighting in courtrooms. And she died at 41 years old on a farm in Western Australia, about as far away from Palm Beach as you possibly can get on this planet. The cause of death, trauma sustained at the hands of Epstein, and the more horrible wounds she suffered afterward by the public. There are people who will tell you that she made it all up, that she saw an opportunity, she targeted wealthy men and cashed in on it. She was in it for the money. I don't buy that. Today, we'll discuss the psychology of how trafficking actually works, and we can look at the data on what this kind of stress does to the brain, and we can cover the timeline so that you can see what a 16-year fight for credibility actually looks like and why it was bravery rather than greed that pushed her to tell her story. It would have actually been easier to not talk about it, to try to forget it and move on, especially when the public had already decided that she was lying. So, it's March 22nd, 2026. This all began in the summer of 2000. Virginia Roberts is 16 years old. She is working at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach. And this is something people skip over. Virginia later disclosed that she had been abused by her father since she was 7 years old. So before Epstein ever entered her life, her nervous system had been already trained to obey. She had already learned that adults cannot be trusted. She had already learned that compliance was how you survived. Ghislaine Maxwell could sniff out the traumatized youth a mile away. She knew what she was doing when she walked up to her that day outside of the locker room at Mar-a-Lago. She knew what she was doing when she offered her a job in massage. Virginia tells her she doesn't know anything about massage. Why would she? The woman assured the child that this was okay. That woman's name was Ghislaine Maxwell. She had been born into British aristocracy, educated at Oxford. She was connected to everyone worth knowing on multiple continents. She had access to a world that most of us, including Virginia Roberts, will never be able to imagine. Private jets, Caribbean islands, mansions, all of these things had price tags so high that even when you read or hear those numbers, they're so far away from our biweekly paychecks that we can't really imagine what it would be like to have that much money. Ghislaine Maxwell did not explain any of this. She did not need to. Her clothes said it. Her confidence said it. Her presence in an elite members-only club said it. But in that moment, when she spoke to Virginia, she spoke to her as an equal. Suddenly, somebody important had recognized potential in a girl that had been degraded her whole life so much that she hadn't even ever considered her own value. Suddenly, Virginia believed she deserved a better life. She could see it finally. She didn't need to be folding towels and cleaning toilets for the rest of her life. She didn't want to do these things for people who would never even really notice her. Within hours, Virginia Roberts was inside a mansion that cost more than every home in her neighborhood combined. It was a dream come true until it wasn't. Within days, she understood what she had actually been recruited for. Within years, she would be trafficked across continents, passed between powerful men. Hundreds of men whose names appeared in newspapers and whose faces appeared on television. Virginia Roberts vanished and was forgotten by a first world who doesn't want to see the nightmare that some of us actually have to live. We chose to believe those nightmares are caused by choice, choices led by addictions or mental health. We cannot believe that slavery still exists. We must focus on the big picture and the freedom of choice. Otherwise, we'd never go outside, right? The world is supposed to be safe. The men who used her were not shadowy figures from the criminal underworld. They were not villains of popular imagination with scars. They weren't sinister. They weren't sweaty and disgusting. They weren't obvious monsters. They were clean and kind. They were philanthropists and scientists, and they were politicians and socialites. They were people who wore the mask of the just man. Their reputation and respectability was their disguise. They attended charity galas. They funded research. They moved through the highest circles of society with an ugly, festering darkness that the world, including Virginia, could have never in a million years imagined. And this, I think, is where people start to get lost. So I want to slow down for a minute. It's easy to assume a massage, while it may not be an appropriate profession for a teenager, it's not trafficking, right? Everyone can see that these teenagers clearly made a choice. The defense attorneys knew this, and they also know that people want to believe that everyone has a choice. So that's exactly why they framed it that way, to make the whole thing sound like a transaction between consenting people. That way, they can easily leave out the grooming escalation. This escalation is why some people don't even know that they've been trafficked. They have mixed thoughts on their employment and make excuses for why they can't leave. They don't think they can't leave because they see themselves as a slave, they think they can't leave because they don't have anywhere else to go. According to Virginia's account, and she does have a book that I've read some of that's pretty interesting, the first visit went from a massage into something else entirely, relatively quickly. Ghislaine Maxwell was present. She directed it, and she normalized it. And this is the mechanism. The first encounter is designed to be ambiguous. It's designed so that the victim can't point to a single moment and say, that's when the crime actually began. Because it wasn't a flipped switch. It starts gradually going from a shoulder massage into something slightly sexual. But that slightly part leaves the victim feeling like they've already crossed a line. In their mind, they are no longer good or innocent. Traffickers, like Maxwell, rely on this internalized shame to keep victims from seeking help. They make the victim feel like co-conspirators rather than the target. First, there's the legit offer, then the boundary testing begins. And then the boundaries keep moving. Then the victim has done things that she can't explain to anyone because of the shame. But now, at least, she has money. She didn't have that before. Now, she's been inside a world that makes her old life look unbearable. And then the explicit threats come. But only after the implicit coercion has already done most of the heavy lifting. I'm going to read this. It is the definition of what human trafficking is. This is the actual thing. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act defines trafficking using the action means purpose model. The action is the recruitment. The means is fraud. The job was not what it appeared to be. The purpose is exploitation. Now, under federal law, because Virginia was under 18, the means element is legally irrelevant. And I know what you're thinking because I thought the same thing. How is it irrelevant? It sounds even more relevant that she's a minor, right? But here's what that actually means in terms of this specific crime. Prosecutors do not need to prove force, fraud, or coercion happened. They don't have to prove she was tricked. They don't have to prove she was threatened. The age alone is enough. The law says if you are under 18, none of those things matter because a child cannot consent. The law basically says we're not even going to argue about whether she was manipulated because it doesn't matter. She was a kid, and that's the entire case right there. It's a scary thought. And you know, I actually looked up how you become a massage therapist, and you have to be 18. I don't think it's legal under 18 anywhere. This escalation pattern is not unique to Epstein. It's documented across other trafficking operations. There was a study in 2025 interviewing rescued trafficking victims, found that emotional coercion was the primary method of control. Abusers systematically destabilize victims emotionally to make physical control unnecessary. You don't need a chain. You don't need to chain somebody to the wall. If you've already convinced them they deserve to be there. I don't know if you guys remember this or if I already said this. I can't remember if I said this in my first version of this live stream or if I said it before we started here, but I did have an interview with a victim of sex trafficking on my channel. If you guys remember April, I can't remember her last name for sure. I think it's Scarsborough or something like that. She wrote a book about female serial killers, and I know some of you bought that book. She used to advocate for other victims of sex trafficking until it became too emotionally problematic for her to talk about it. But the most interesting thing and the most terrifying thing about what she said was that she did not know she was trafficked. Somebody at a group where victims were talking about what they had gone through. It was group therapy. Somebody at that group said, "Hey, you've been sex trafficked." And she was like, "No, I wasn't." She went to a place to interview for a waitress job. Then I think that first day she worked, she got drugged. They gave her a beer. She was underage, but the beer was drugged. And they took advantage of her and threatened her family if she didn't come back the next day. It's really scary to consider that you might have been sex trafficked and not even know it. It's even worse in this case because Maxwell laid out the manipulation like a science. She made everything feel like a choice. There were no like threats with a gun or anything like that. I mean, if she could have left, why didn't she leave? In the, getting back to Virginia's story here, why didn't Virginia leave sooner? For a 16-year-old girl whose father was in prison and their family is, insignificant, they were having a hard time, paying their bills. So the thought of actually leaving this place, returning to reality, a life of desperate poverty, and a home that was abusive, the trafficker suddenly becomes the provider, the boss, the savior, all at once. Virginia was already carrying a lifetime of trauma. Now she was being transported internationally. Caribbeans, New York, New Mexico, London, Paris. She did not have access to money. She didn't control her passport. She couldn't trust an adult. She had no safety net to go back to. And when she finally did express a need to leave this island, she and her family were threatened with violence if she tried to leave. Judith Herman wrote the foundational clinical text on this, trauma and recovery, back in the 90s. When a person is held in captivity, the caper becomes the only source of the captor. The captor becomes the only source of danger and the only source of relief from that danger. The victim's identity becomes fragments. She loses the ability to trust her own perceptions. She bonds to the person who controls her. This is not because she's weak, not because she wants to, but because her nervous system has learned that survival depends on reading the moods of their captor, anticipating the needs of their captor, and becoming whatever their captor wants them to be. But this is not Stockholm Syndrome. I know that everyone uses that phrase, but it's wrong. Stockholm Syndrome was never peer-reviewed. It came from a single hostage event in 1973 that was coined by a psychiatrist who never interviewed the hostages. The current clinical framework, pioneered by researchers like doctors, I'm going to get these names wrong, Chitra Raghavan, and Kendra Joychek. But they coined the term trauma coerced attachment, the acronym TCA, specifically in the context that human trafficking, the mechanism in this, coercive control, plus a massive power imbalance, plus alternating reward and punishment, creates bonds of affection and loyalty to the abuser. It's not a personality disorder. It's neurological adaptation to captivity. Now we're in the first quarter of 2026. The clinical framework has shifted from viewing this as a mental struggle to a neurobiological injury. Now we understand that chronic coercion actually remodels the brain's alarm systems and becomes physically impossible for a victim to just leave because their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic and decision-making, is effectively held in a constant state of survival driven by hypervigilance. Think about that for a second. It makes a lot of sense. Dr. Mary Twiss has also demonstrated in some of her research earlier this year that's come out It's called trauma and violence informed care. That this injury dictates every interaction a survivor has with the world. It's why a victim might sound unreliable or detached when she or he, when they finally speak about what happened to them. Their brain is still prioritizing survival over the storytelling. This model, this modern lens proves that what a defense attorney calls consent is actually automated compliance, a physiological state where the body chooses submission over death, even if there's no gun pointed at them. But here's what matters most for Virginia's story. When the captivity ended, the wiring that was rewired, her brain was rewired. It doesn't go back to normal, ever. The changes that she experienced as she developed into an adult are nearly permanent scars. The nervous system stays calibrated to coercion. So safety feels wrong unless somebody else is in control. Can you imagine feeling that? I've felt it, and it's not fun, especially once you become aware of it. Every kindness feels suspicious. Control becomes love. Love is not control. I just want to put that out there. You know, it's not just a theory. We've talked about Elizabeth Smart on my channel, at least in the trivia that I've done. 14 years old, taken from her bedroom in Salt Lake City, held for 9 months, abused daily. She walked past police officers who could have saved her, but she said nothing. When they asked her why, she said she felt so dirty, so filthy, that she believed her life had no value. That is the effects of coercive control. J.C. Dugard was 11 years old, taken and held for 18 years, had 2 children in captivity. After her rescue, interviewers noted how she struggled to condemn the man who took her, how her language softened when she spoke about him, how she couldn't bring herself to use the words for what he'd done. These women didn't choose to stay. Their brains adapted to survive. And even when the survival situation ended, the adaptation didn't turn off. And that's what happened to Virginia Giuffre. So I think I'm going to play a video clip real quick. I hope you guys understand this is not an easy to talk about thing. You know, coercive control happens in all kinds of different ways. This tragedy, what makes me so angry now is that I could have been, I should have been paying attention to this a long time ago. But the less people who were paying attention to it, the more people like Epstein are out there doing similar things. It's still happening. They most likely have figured out a way to hide it better. It's sickening to me. I mean, it really is. 16 is almost an adult, right? I mean, I remember being 16. I remember my way of thinking at 16 years old. It's not so different from the way it is now, but there was a difference. There was a lot of things that I was naive about and I didn't understand fully. Your brain is still developing at 16 years old. And when you see something like this happen to a child, and it didn't just happen to one, it happened to thousands, it just makes me angry. It should not be happening, and it especially should not be happening by men who are public figures. It's got to be some level of affluence that lets these people think that it's okay to do what they were doing. But anyway, let me see if I can find this other video that I want to share. Oh no, I think I lost it. I may have lost it. Yeah. Oh wait, maybe I can find it again. Yeah, this is it.
I want to take you back to our top story tonight, the arrest of former Prince Andrew as part of an investigation into allegations of suspicion of misconduct in public office. We mentioned Virginia Giuffre earlier in the show, who said she was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein to the former prince. Again, we want to be clear, today's arrest is separate from those accusations, which Andrew denies. But her family is telling us in an interview first to NBC that they woke up to the news this morning, and it felt surreal. Let me start with the news that has broken today, the developing news today, the arrest of now former Prince Andrew. I'll just ask you very simply your reaction.
I'm not sure that has fully hit us yet. I think it feels like this surreal moment, a piece of justice that Virginia has been fighting for this entire time. And I think we're just so proud. We're so proud. We're so freaking proud of our sister right now.
Sky, tell me what's going through your mind.
I mean, I think what Amanda said is perfect. I think it's a very proud moment for us. I think the first step here has been taken by the UK, which is amazing. I think there's so much more that needs to be done here. I'm hoping they conduct a full investigation and there's a conviction of some sort. I think, the thing that keeps resonating in my head is when my sister, she famously said, and I'm just going to paraphrase this now, but they know what happened. We know what happened, and only one of us is telling the truth, and we know that's us.
One of the things that's worth noting here is that the arrest, based on our understanding of it, is related not to the sex abuse allegations that, obviously, as you know, Andrew has denied that Virginia has made. So it's a separate matter. And I wonder, how do you think about that piece of it? This is when you talk about, Sky, a potential conviction, it would be on something separate and, not related directly to Virginia. How do you think about that?
I would say this is what we've been calling for the entire time. I mean, in the most recent interviews you've seen us do, I mean, one of the biggest things that we continue to state is that if they're capable of doing this most heinous crime out there, what else are they capable of doing? And so that's what we're seeing downstream here. And I hope that this is just the beginning, because I think there's a lot to be said.
Amanda, do you see it if there were to be a conviction?
So there we go. So, they mentioned that, there's two of us talking about this and only one of us is telling the truth. And I know I'm telling the truth. The problem with that statement, just to be the devil's advocate here, is that, from the outside, it's much harder to decide who's actually telling the truth. And, this man, a former prince, I mean, technically, I guess he's always been a prince until, whatever. I don't know much about him exactly, or England's, monarchy. But the fact that he's been arrested, even though it's not going to be tied directly to Virginia, her family is, so happy because he's still going to have to pay in some way for what he did. And, what they're saying is that they want the investigation to be thorough. And I'll let them continue. I'll let the rest of this play out. It's I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's like 10 minutes long, but it is interesting, and you can find it on YouTube pretty easy. It was just it just came out like a month ago. So, whoops.
Conviction here on this matter that is separate from the allegations that Virginia made. Do you see that as justice for your sister?
It's an increment, right? So when we look at justice and we look at the way this case breaks down, and a lot of the reasons why there aren't like official charges, because we're looking at like statute of limitations in different countries, and it can be a lot harder, unfortunately, to try sexual abuse cases. We encourage the U.S. to keep the pressure going. The time clock is like clicking here, okay? It's ticking in the U.S., and it's time for us to start pushing.
So, oops, hang on, there we go. So, she brings up a really good point. This did happen technically in other countries. So what does that mean for the people who are trafficked? It's crazy, right? I mean, I don't understand international law at all, really. But if this were you, if this happened to you, you would want somebody to be accountable for the crimes that they've committed against you. But, they're talking about statutes of limitation. So the crime happened too far in the past. So they can't prosecute that crime. What they can only do is look for something, that they can prosecute the person for. And this family is saying that, that has to be enough. We just want a thorough investigation, and we want people to pay for their crimes, even if it's not the specific crime that went against their particular family.
for real justice.
Can you take me to the moment when you found out, when you got the phone call that Andrew had been arrested overseas?
Oh my God, it's so surreal, Hallie. I can't even describe. I mean, you don't always get these wins every day, and I know it may not be directly, correlating to Virginia, but I do believe Virginia's on the back end pulling some strings. And how ironic on his birthday, right? So, it was very surreal. I got a call from Deanie, and it was just, I think a flood of emotions very quickly. And I'm going to be honest, I think we've been up since 3 o'clock this morning, the moment the news broke, and the adrenaline kicked in, and I don't think we've been able to go back to bed. And I think we're still running on that.
Amanda, for you, I know it's adrenaline. It's also, I can see it in your face. It's emotion.
Yeah, every time these things happen, it always puts us back to the space of like, we really wish she was here physically to see it, because it is her pressure and her truth that has brought us to this place, that has, paved the way for all of these survivors to come forward. And so, there's mixed emotions. We just miss her so much and wish that we could call her to just.
So the biggest reason why I believe this woman was trafficked, and that she's not lying about it. Yes, she got money. She won, different lawsuits and was paid for those things. She got, the first interview she had, I think she got paid $160,000 for the exclusive rights to that interview. But the reason why I don't think she was lying in that first interview, that she made all of this up, is because she kept talking about it, despite how much it affected her and her public presence. It was actually harder for her to keep defending herself for as long as she did than it would have been just to, get a couple of payouts. If she really was doing that, she would have disappeared. She wouldn't have started nonprofits. She wouldn't, be thinking about the other victims who are being trafficked now. And, I think, I'm going to have to end this live stream now. I do have quite a bit more that I wanted to talk about, but I think I'm going to end with a few statistics on human trafficking, because it is important. We live in a place, most of us, if you're watching this, you're living in a country where safety is supposed to, is just natural to be living in a safe place. We don't want to think how dark and scary it is. So we ignore all of those things for our own, mental health. We can't pay attention to these things. But I really think it is important to hear these numbers and to think about it. 5 million people are currently trafficked for the purpose of exploitation worldwide. $5 million people. That seems impossible to me. Women and girls represent 77% of the detected victims globally. And I say detected because they don't know the actual number. There was a 2024 report that states that the sex trafficking industry, if you want to call it that, I think it's wrong to call it that, but generates $150 billion a year. Last year, the government confirmed in court findings that Epstein alone, by himself, harmed over 1,000 victims. Julie Brown of the Miami Herald identified 80 of those and located about 60 of them and interviewed them in 2018. Palm Beach detective Joseph Riccieri testified that he interviewed around 33 of those women. All but 2 described the same pattern. Recruited for massages. Then the encounters escalated over time. Most were under the age of 18, and none of them had any experience with massage. There's research that suggests that 54% of trafficking victims were recruited through their friends, 31% through romantic relationships that turned out coercive. Epstein's operation used the friend pipeline directly. Victims were told to bring their friends. Investigators traced chains through a single high school. The FBI seized 10 yearbooks from Royal Palm Beach High School alone because there was so many victims that came from that same school. That's not a conspiracy of liars. It's proof of a hunting ground. And it disgusts me. Well, guys, I think that's all I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. I hope to write some more papers on this actual topic. I've been doing a lot of research over the last year or so into the coercive relationships and, familicide, and all of these things are kind of all connected. There's just so much, it's hard to talk about it all in a short amount of time. But I just keep an eye out. I think I've got a much larger document that you'll be able to read that will kind of cover what I was trying to cover here. I know I probably missed some points that I intended that might have been significant. I don't know yet. But I do appreciate you guys being here. Thank you, April. Thank you, Molly. Thank you to everyone else who's not in the chat but watching. I would appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to my channel. Share my content with your friends, and maybe I'll see more of you here next time. But until then, as always, stay kind, be vigilant, and always question the truth.